Hi guys, thank you so much for joining back on my YouTube channel. We had a really good feedback from the last video with Robert Bosnak and working with reality shifting. So we decided to do another one. We had some more questions. We got some of your questions answered, and we are bringing on another TikTok creator in the spiritual and reality shifting community. And her name is Stephanie, and I'm going to link down in the description her TikTok at and Robert Bosnak joining us again. So stay tuned. Hi, and welcome back for Robert Bosnak. We had him on last time talking about some questions regarding the reality shifting, some dreams, and this is Stephanie Gibbons as well. So we're gonna continue that chat and yeah, so we had some questions too, Robert, from the previous interview jam session that we had done. Some of them were interesting more on like the dream side, as opposed to the reality shifting. But one really interesting one that I wanted to just see if we could start off with was I actually don't know how to pronounce this, aphantasia, where somebody can't visualize things. I didn't know
Yeah.
if you had any insight on that.
Yes. Um, there are people that actually have no ability to go into their imagination and see things in, well, to go there at will and then see things. I do think that people who have aphantasia can still dream. Um, what I do with people who have, I have never worked with somebody who has aphantasia, but I have worked with people who have a lot of trouble getting into imagination. Then you can work by way of dreaming, because people can remember their dreams, and then you work on a little piece of dream, and that's how you get the imagination primed and going. But if a person really has aphantasia, I don't know what that means, if it's the same as aphasia where you can't find words, and if it's something that is part of a brain thing. If it's part of a brain thing, then I don't know how much you can do, but it's very interesting. Just thinking about that, um, people who have become blind during their lives, not people who were born blind, but people who've gone blind during their lives, um, in dreams, they can see things. And so I've worked with blind people, and you can orient yourself in that world, and you can see things in that world, and you can go back into that world, and you're not blind in that world, and that helps with orientation. So I don't know if you can do the same with aphantasia.
Very interesting. Thank
Do
you.
you, sorry, I'm just gonna like stem off of that. Do you think like we're not meant to remember our dreams? Like what, do you think there's something that suppresses our memory
Mhm.
um when we wake up?
Yeah. I always think that we weren't really built for consciousness. Consciousness is an effort. Um, and it's much easier to stay in a relatively unconscious state and just do things and keep on doing things. So it's an effort. But what happens with dreaming, I can see, I have to back up. I am a phenomenologist, so I'm just looking at what happens. I don't know why things happen, okay? What happens is that as you wake up, you go into amnesia. So there seems to be, if you look at it at a landscape, as you move out of dreaming, you move through amnesia, and then you've forgotten most of your dreams because you dream many hours a night. So it could be that it's good to forget them, because otherwise you would be with all these memories of all these things that have happened, and the world would become extremely confusing. And so I think that we are not, if I can say anything, is we're not meant to remember all of our dreams. Definitely not.
That makes
So sorry, Steph, go ahead.
No, that I was just gonna say that makes sense, and
That's
it,
awesome.
it is interesting when you said when we remember a lot of those dreams, things can get confusing around here because I've had instances where I literally can't remember if something actually happened or I dreamed it because it was like, wait, I think I know about this, but it was like I'm confusing memories now.
Yes, no, I have that too. I was thinking yesterday of a house that I visited, and I know the whole house and I know it really well. And then I realized this is a dream house. And I've been in this dream house several times, but I cannot in any way differentiate it from a physical house. It's sometimes very difficult to differentiate between physical reality and dreaming reality because our brains can't do that. Our brains are made to react in the same way to dream reality or to shifting reality as to physical reality. Our brain cannot make that distinction.
So what are your like ideas or thoughts as far as where we go when we dream? What are they?
Mhm.
Projections,
No,
other realities?
the only thing I know is that we experience it as a reality. So
Yeah.
we are going to a world that is experienced as entirely real. We're going to a world where something happens, where everything around us appears physical, and where we are absolutely convinced that we're awake. So it's very difficult to prove to yourself that at this moment you're awake or dreaming. It's almost impossible. So I think that dreaming is a reality. And what kind of reality, I do not know. And I do not know what kind of medium this reality is made of. I have no idea about that. I just know that, and this is true the world over. So what I've done in my life is I've traveled the world and I've asked people about their dreaming and how they dream. And there is one thing that I always hear wherever I am, and that is I was somewhere and something happened. And then I woke up. So to me, a dream is somewhere where something happens and then you wake up.
Have you ever met people who have narcolepsy and heard their stories?
Yes, yes, I've worked with several people who have narcolepsy. So they cannot control falling asleep, right? And so
Yeah.
suddenly fall asleep, and then frequently the ones that I've worked with have dreams, and sometimes they can remember them. But it's a very annoying thing to have because it's you can't really control it, and so suddenly you fall asleep, and you pray that it won't happen behind the steering wheel.
Yeah, so I have narcolepsy actually, and I've had it for over like a decade now. And so that is actually what has sent me down this spiritual path with like dreams and all that, because I've actually mastered like lucid dreaming and I've
Right.
surpassed like sleep paralysis and all that. And now I believe I'm astral projecting, and that I cannot control. And that's something this stuff goes through too. So um
So tell me about your astral projection and how it is different from lucid dreaming.
so
She has, so I'm sorry to interrupt. She has so
Thank
many amazing stories. I want you to like talk about some of them too, about the places you go. She remembers them all in such vivid detail
yes. So
too.
that's the thing with narcolepsy is like we don't have the steps around the REM sleep, this dream state, like where a normal person does. So like there's nothing, there's like my dream state and then I'm awake. Like reality and sleep, it's like, so we remember everything when we wake up. And so it's
Are
insane.
you groggy after a narcoleptic event?
So like I'll feel it coming and it feels like my eyes are just shutting like a sleep attack. If I embrace it, I sleep for 15 minutes and then like I'm refreshed, and it would feel like a 3-hour nap for
Yeah,
you guys. But since I go straight to REM, I only need like 20 minutes.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have something like that too, but not to your extreme. And it's also that dreaming doesn't only take place during REM. You know that, right? That
Yeah. Yeah.
dreaming also takes place during sleep onset. So people
Yeah.
can get into this hypnagogic state and then suddenly they're in dreaming. But what you're talking about, I'm very interested in how you see then the difference between what you're going through, and you said you can lucid dream, and how is that different from astral projection?
So it was first really, it took years to figure out that I was actually astral projecting, but it started with like lucid dreaming. I've been doing that for a very long time. I can control everything. And the first thing that like I couldn't control a black hole formed in my dream. And in order for it to like go away, I needed to sacrifice myself and I needed to jump into it.
Right.
And that was like the first like red flag. I'm like, what is this? Why can't I control it? And that always happened when I was on another timeline with like two versions of me. Like I was always in front of myself, looking at another version of myself.
Right.
And so I come to realize like I can't be by myself. I can't be next to another body of mine. And so it started there, but then I started to realize like I was learning things. So like there were things that I would wake up and then Google and I'm like, holy crap, that's real. And I guess like the difference I feel is I know when I'm not astral projecting more than when I am, to be honest. So it's like this feeling where I keep having to check in on my body. So when I'm astral projecting, I feel like a tie, like I'm nervous that I'm going to lose a connection to something, which is my body. But when I'm lucid dreaming, I'm more carefree and like free, you know?
Yeah.
I don't have a tie to my body.
Yeah. So from my perspective, lucid dreaming is not about controlling things. Lucid dreaming is about being in another world and realizing that you're fully in another world that is entirely real, and yet you're dreaming, and that and that all your senses work, and that everything works, and that the world is entirely real, and you're dreaming. So this sense of not being in control to me also extends to lucid dreaming, because yeah, there are people that can, like you, that can change things without limit. But I do think that it's really important when you're in a lucid dream that you let the world happen and that you don't try to control the world. I think that what you're seeing with the black hole is actually that you have to give over control, and that your control is being taken away from you, and then you are in what I call the involuntary imagination. And so I make a very strong distinction between the voluntary imagination and the involuntary imagination. And because you have that talent of which you have, it's the narcolepsy is a curse, but it's also a talent. And since you have the talent of the narcolepsy, and you can move into that world, your voluntary imagination spreads into the world of dreaming and into that world. I'm interested in the involuntary imagination. I'm interested in when the black hole comes in. I'm interested when you're out of control, because then something new comes towards you, and that has new information that is the freshest kind of information. So when I work with nightmares, for instance, with people, I try to get into the perpetrator in the nightmare, because that brings in the new information. That is the black hole that you cannot control. So that is my perspective of it. So I don't make the distinction, and in the shifting community, I'm getting flack about that. I don't make a distinction between dreaming and out-of-body experience and astral projection. My distinction is between voluntary and involuntary imagination. So it's a different way of distinguishing things.
I think
So-
that makes, sorry.
No, you go.
I was gonna say, I think that makes a lot of sense. And the way that I kind of view dreaming and lucid dreaming and astral projection is all like a spectrum. Like I view it, it's all the same thing, but it's just like different like markers
Yes,
of it.
yes, you're right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
That's
then,
how I see it too.
okay, beautiful.
Yeah.
So I was gonna say it makes sense to me as well, with the involuntary imagination and the voluntary imagination distinction. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. In my profession, I'm a psychoanalyst. My profession, we distinguish between things that are ego syntonic, things that you like, things that work for you, things that you have some control over, and ego dystonic, that you have no control over. Usually you don't like, you keep it away, because that will alter your habitual consciousness, and you don't want, a human being doesn't want to change their habits. That, I think, is a rule for all human beings.
I definitely think it's like an underlying commonality between many humans, and that's kind of where they're like, oh, I'm good doing this. And how you said, I think consciousness, we weren't necessarily meant to be conscious like this. It takes the effort to do that. I found it interesting. I just wanted to note when Stephanie was talking about the black holes. I have this book, and I don't know, I don't think we talked about this last time, but it's by Michio Kaku, and
Yeah.
he's the co-founder of string theory.
Mhm.
And he, in the book, I sent Stephanie a page about it, and it was talking about black holes and like wormholes. Essentially, we were like kind of theorizing back and forth about these black holes she was experiencing. And she said every time she would jump into the black hole, she would wake up here. And I was like, whoa, what if it's like a wormhole instead of like a black hole? What if you're literally just like, that's like a, giving up control, but also waking up. So it's got interesting ties that I was just
Yeah.
felt the need to mention
Yeah.
there.
And so that is a lot of people are interested in cosmology. What you're talking about is cosmology and the way that we see the world. And these days, our cosmology is very much related to quantum physics and to string theory. And you have to realize that in order for string theory to work, you need 12 dimensions. And so it is something that is a level of complexity that I don't know that most people understand. I certainly don't. And string theory has a lot of problems at the moment of being demonstrated. But I am not so much interested in, is this a black hole or is it, I am interested in the experience. This experience, the school that I come from is the school of a psychiatrist called C.G. Jung. And Jung, there were like two beginnings of my field of psychoanalysis. One is Freud, and the other was Jung. And Jung did the same thing that you did. When he became overwhelmed with this world of images, he was standing at the edge of an abyss. And the only thing he could do is jump in. And that's when his whole understanding of the world completely changed. And so the jumping into the abyss or jumping into the black hole or jumping into the void or making a leap of faith, that leap of faith is very important in a person's life. I think that that's one of the most courageous things that you can do, a leap of faith.
And so what do you think like I should take in from that information? Like I jumped in and I took the leap of faith. What do you think I should take from that?
That in the first place, you have the courage to go into the absolute unknown. And that because the black hole is the current image of the absolute unknown or the god of the abyss or whatever it was called in other times. In the first place, I would take from it that you have that courage. And many people don't. Many people don't have the courage to go into the absolute unknown. And then the thing that I do is when that happens, I slow things down. So what you're trying to do is to go in super slow motion. And as you go in super slow motion, you will start seeing things and feeling things that you don't see if you go at regular speed. Imagination is very fast. So the way that we get deeper into imagination is by slowing it down. What happens then is that you have to get the mind out because the mind works in high speed and you want to get the mind out of the imagination. So what is it? Why is it? What does it mean? That's all mind. You have to get that out. And you get that out by slowing things down. And then as you are jumping into the black hole, go in the most micro speed that you can and see what happens as you jump in, so that your mind can't jump in and tell you what's happening. Because as long as your mind tells you what's happening, you don't get into another world. You get into the world of your habitual mind.
It's also interesting how you said that the black hole is portraying itself as the not control, like, because I feel like I can control everything. And I thought it was interesting when you said the black hole represents the uncontrollable.
Yeah.
And it's like testing me. Do you think those things are tests to our soul? Or
you could see it that way. I don't see it that way, but you could definitely see it that way. because lots of mystical traditions. So this is a mystical event that you're going through, right? And
Mhm.
so lots of mystical traditions see these things as trials and ongoing trials, and that's why you see all these saints that have gone through trial after trial after trial. So you can see it that way. I see it more that actually in the creative imagination there is no control. That we are, I come from dreaming. So what I see is um, we enter into this whole world, and this whole world is not something that we created. We enter into it, we fall into it. So much of it we do not control. And being out of control is a very frightening thing. And so that if you can get through the fear of being out of control, you slowly begin to access that world, and you don't access it as this is part of me and this is part of what I am learning and this is part of how I get richer, but as an explorer. I'm an explorer. I love to explore things. That's why I love to talk to you guys, and I love to talk to the shifting community. I want to explore.
What's the craziest thing you've explored?
I think the craziest things I have explored is also with other people, how when you shift perspectives and when you move into other places and into other worlds, they are so real and they are so rich, and they have effect on your health, they have effect on your emotions. Um, the craziest thing is that the creative imagination is incredibly intelligent. And from very early on, I've seen that everybody lives with genius and that you can access genius. And that doesn't mean that you are a genius. That's the misunderstanding that came in the early 19th century during the Romantics, where suddenly people became geniuses. Genius is a creative spirit. So I think the craziest thing for me is that I can attach and connect to creative spirit and live in worlds that I never knew existed. So that's probably the craziest.
So you're talking about like genius as a spiritual like being,
Yeah,
energy?
yeah, the spirit. The word genius means creative
Yeah.
spirit.
So you
And
connect with them.
pardon?
So you like connect with them.
Yeah. That's genius is the name in Latin. In the Greek, it's called daimon, and it is a creative spirit that is just as real as your physical being, but it has more connection to the world of ideas. It has more connection to what is called eternity, because the genius is between mortality and eternity. It is between the universal laws and our personal mortal life. And so it has more overview. It can see more. And
That's so cool.
this is very old. What I'm talking about is 2,500 years old.
Wow. Well, I've never heard anything of that. Like it's kind of like he or she, they are a medium of
Yes.
like
Yes,
that's
they're literally medium because they're in the middle. They're in
yeah.
the middle between the eternal values and our mortal life. That's why they are medium. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah, this is the beginning of Western philosophy. This is the basis of Western philosophy. And then we got lost somewhere in the 12th, 13th, 14th century when we got the notion that there is only spirit and matter. But before that, there was a world of spirit, imagination, and matter. And the world of imagination is a real world. And in that world of imagination, these daimones or these genies live, and or the fairy or whatever they are. And so you can connect to that world, that in between world. It's a real world. It is just, we lost it in Western consciousness over the last 800 years.
Wow. So that's where we go when we dream.
That's what I think.
Wow.
It's called In Latin, it's called the mundus imaginalis, the world of imagination. In Arabic, it's called the alam al-mithal. It has different names in many different languages. It's a world that is entirely real, that is in between.
It does that. So that kind of reminds me of the term of liminal space, or like liminal beings, where it's the in between. They literally live in between.
Yes, yes, yeah, because the word liminal means border, and
Right.
limen is border. And so it's what lives on the border between the world of mortality and the world of the immortal, because
Wow.
the laws of physics are immortal laws. So, and okay, shall I go on?
Yeah, keep going, keep going. I'm into this.
Okay, good. So what happened was that that physics was the most successful science, right? Physics started in about 1600 with Galileo, and so it became a really successful science, and so everything wanted to be physics. But physics is about eternal laws, and it's about the world of ideas and the world of eternal laws. And human experience was thrown out. This happened this was codified in 1650 by Descartes. So the human experience dropped out, and science only became interested in eternal things, things that were always true. But we have to get back to this world in between these eternal laws and our mortality, because that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where we are. That's what we experience.
Do you have any questions? I don't want to like, I feel
No,
like I
it's
can ask
okay.
you.
No,
Um,
it's okay. I was gonna comment too. It's interesting that you say it like that too, because I found myself kind of doing that, like inherently, where I didn't even know about any of that, where it was talking about, the phenomenology. I didn't know it was the study of experiences, and that's what I started doing with my own experiences, because I was
Yeah.
like, let me make some sense of this here, because I was brought up in this very like academic track, and I, very like rational minded or whatever, and then at some point I was like, whoa, I'm having experiences that doesn't make any sense, nobody has answers, so like I'm going to find these answers. And then I'm like bridging the two with like phenomenology, but also trying to figure out how it balances and connects, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yes.
find that really interesting.
Yeah, phenomenology is when experience came back to science. And because it was thrown out, because Descartes said that we cannot trust experience because we never know whether we're dreaming or not. So you cannot trust experience ever. So he threw out experience altogether. And so now that's coming back in phenomenology, that's coming back in that experience is a way of connecting to reality.
Totally. And it's interesting too, because I'm sure you've heard of it talked about like this, but I've heard of life, like this reality, being talked about as the big dream.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Merrily, 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 merrily. Life.
Somebody commented that on the TikTok about our last chat, Robert. I'm not even kidding. Somebody literally was like, merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
Yeah.
And I was like, you just saying that right now, it's crazy.
So, yeah, life being a dream, it just depends how you see life, of course, because after we die, do we wake up? If we wake up, then life was a dream. And if we don't wake up and something else happens, then maybe life is not a dream. I don't know if life is a dream, but after, like you can see with the study of memory, that if you ask somebody to remember something that happened this morning, and then you ask a month later, and then it has already changed. And if you ask them a year later, that's completely changed. So everything moves into the world of dreaming. Everything moves into the world of imagination. So you get the imprint of history, the imprint of what happens here and now, and that imprint then slowly moves into imagination and becomes a dream.
so what are
Mm.
your like thoughts on other dimensions then, that like the fourth and fifth dimension that like pierce space and time?
Well, from my limited understanding of Einstein, I do believe that we live in a four-dimensional world, that there is space-time, that you cannot think about space and time as separate entities. if there is a fifth dimension, I do not know. I don't know if you can call that a dimension, but I know that there are many different worlds and there are many realities. So I call it a reality because for me, reality is a category of experience, right? We experience things as real. And then there are people that say that is not real. Yeah, they can say that that is not real. For them, it's not real, but for you, it's real. And there's many discussions going on where people are struggling over what is real. If we can just assume that what is real for this person is real for this person, and therefore it's real for that life, we
Mhm.
would get much fewer struggles.
I'm curious about like how memories would be on the fifth dimension, you know, like the imagination, or the, what did you call it? The
The
world,
the world of imagination.
the
Yeah,
world of
yeah.
imagination. Would that exist for higher dimensions if space-time, like, it isn't or time isn't perceived as linear? We wouldn't have memories to look at the past. There wouldn't be a future. Everything would just like, all our experience would happen like now,
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
you know?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think that we may have memories of the future, but we probably wouldn't recognize them because we don't know the future. So if we have any kind of, if time is not linear, and if you can access other systems, because if we go to another star system, if we can get to another star system, we are in another totally different kind of time.
Mhm.
So if time is not linear and we would have memories of the future, then I don't think that we would recognize them, because it would be so different from anything that we would recognize. It would be so alien. I don't think we would recognize them.
It's like beyond our consciousness to even think about how we would even perceive time. Like,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
wouldn't even need to speak in sentences, you know? I have to like, in order to express myself, I have to finish my full sentence from start to finish.
yes. And that's why, yeah, uh, I think that the world is also musical, right? And so that's why you have to finish your sentences, because you have to finish a musical phrase.
I love that.
Yeah. And you can have a thought that is just a flash, and then you spend a lot of time unpacking it and making it into a musical thing that other people can hear.
To
Because
like
this is about
communicate with it.
communication that you're talking about, right? We
Yeah.
need to communicate with each other. So we need to be in concert. If we're not in concert, then that's why I call this a jam. We're
I like
jamming
that.
together.
And
That's awesome.
that kind of reminds me how you were just talking about like future memories and stuff. So that's actually one of the theories for deja vu. And I've experienced something like that where I don't know if it was necessarily, it was just a future memory, but what had happened was at one point I was in my house and I was going upstairs to get a suitcase. I came down here, I was walking down the hallway. And then as I reached the end of the hallway to like turn into my room, I felt like I was getting the suitcase and packing for a trip to see like my foreign European boyfriend, who like I that was not even happening. I was like, I'm going to Miami right now. Like, I don't know what's going on. And then 2 years later, I went upstairs to get my suitcase. I came downstairs and I was literally packing to visit my European boyfriend.
That's
And I sat there and I was like, whoa, like that's freaky. So like
Yeah.
I think maybe, I don't know if it was like I tapped into that future timeline or it was a future memory or what.
I keep all those things under the category of weird. And so that to me is a very important scientific category, weird. And so that is really weird to me. And so I keep them as an anomalous experience. Or if you watch The Matrix, then deja vu is resetting the matrix. So you can explain it in many different ways. I like to stay with the experience that makes you sit down and say, wow, that is so strange. That
Mhm.
to me matters more than what it is or how it can be explained.
Totally. And that ties in a little bit with, I know you mentioned Einstein for a brief period, but his interpretation of quantum physics, now what we call quantum physics, was spooky action at a distance. Like he was noticing that things were happening. He was like, that's spooky. I just think that's so
Well,
awesome.
actually, spooky action at a distance was a statement from Einstein, and he said it couldn't happen. And so he, in 1936, he wrote a paper together with Rosen and Podolsky, and that showed that spooky action at a distance couldn't happen. And he explained the mechanism why it might happen, but because it would be spooky action at a distance, and that's the slit experiment, right? When one electron becomes two and then they stay connected, which is called entanglement. And then 30 years later in Bell's theorem, he proved that it is actually happening. So it's very interesting that the spooky action at a distance was Einstein saying that couldn't happen because we don't have spooky action at a distance. He disproved it, and then from his disproving it, they could prove it. It's very weird.
I didn't know that, honestly. Everything that I had read thus far about it was like talking about Einstein first, talking about, spooky action at a distance. It's
Yeah,
really
but he didn't believe in it. And that's
Yeah.
that was his whole problem with quantum physics, because he thought it was not elegant. And he believed that the physical laws in the end always would be elegant.
Wow.
bougie.
What are your so you're saying you met in the world of imagination, or in the in-between, that in-between being,
Yeah.
how were you sure that you met in that being, that was a real being versus it being imagination?
No, you see, now you've moved back into our more recent notion of imagination, that imagination is not real, right? In the 800 years that I'm talking about, is imagination moved from a form of reality to Disneyland, the opposite of reality. Walt Disney created Disneyland because he wanted to get away from his childhood. He says so himself. So imagination became a way to get away from reality. But the imagination that I'm talking about is reality. So that when you encounter something, it behaves as entirely real. And I take it at face value. I take that if I meet somebody who comes to me and begins to talk to me, I take that as a being, as an entity, as a presence, because to themselves, they are a presence.
I guess more like, I want to know how you feel. Like, do you feel a different feeling around some entities versus others? Because I tend to feel some are heavier, some are lighter, some are darker, some are lighter.
Oh God, yes, absolutely. They're all individual. And so in this world, there are heavyweights and there are lightweights, and they're great boxers. And so every of these beings has their own kind of density, their own kind of impact, their own kind of strength, their own kind of weakness. They have their own lives. And what I do is I help people to move into that perspective. So to shift, my thing is perspective shifting. So I shift out of your habitual perspective, the habitual perspective of Stephanie, and I move into the perspective of the one that you encounter. And then you begin to see it from the perspective of the other. And then that world of the other becomes a whole world. And that's how I see that I, through perspective shifting, get into reality shifting. Some reality shifters totally disagree with me.
How would you do that to me? How would you help me perspective shift?
Okay, so what I would do is like we would go to the moment where you stand in front of the black hole and you realize that this is something that I cannot control. That's where I would help you to slow that down, to feel the way that you are in your body when you realize this is out of control, to feel that sense of being out of control, and to sense that all the way through your body. And then very slowly, increment by increment, move into the falling into the black hole. and feeling that without losing consciousness, because what the first thing that happens is that when something becomes very frightening, you lose consciousness. So by going really slow, you wouldn't lose consciousness. And then I would help you to shift perspectives from your perspective to the perspective of the black hole, and begin to sense what the black hole, what the experience is once you turned, and this black hole senses you coming in. What happens to the black hole? So that's how I would help you.
Whoa. Like what would happen to the black hole? Like what,
I
how
have
does
no idea that you can unpredictable. You can
Yeah.
only do it by doing it.
Yeah, it's insane. Like what is the black hole saying? Like what's on the other
That
side?
is the black holes thing. That
Yeah.
is, and then you are in the world of an alien perspective.
Yeah.
As long as you control it, you're not yet in the world of alien perspectives. And what I have found is that alien perspectives carry the most information.
Wow, so cool.
I have two, well, like a question and a statement, I guess. So the statement goes back to the earlier discussion where you're talking about how initially imagination was, it is reality, but we've gotten to this perspective that imagination is not reality and it's the opposite. So I think that's really fascinating, going back to the origins of it, how it is literally reality, because I mean, I'm sure you've both heard the saying where your thoughts create reality, your mind creates reality, the imagination creates reality.
Mhm.
So I
Well,
find that
that's why it's so important to always know what perspective you come from. Because the perspective that you come from creates the reality that you're in. You can see that, for instance, if you come from a Republican perspective, you see another world than if you come from a Democratic perspective or Democrat perspective. So the perspective creates the world that you're in. That's why it is so important. And in academia, we spend like how many decades trying to deconstruct. Deconstruction was actually about deconstructing your own perspective and then seeing from what perspective you're seeing something. And a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people are in their own perspective, and that's the truth.
and yeah, 100%. It's crazy that you say it like that too, because I'm literally writing a book right now about exactly that, like about exactly how to like understand that what we believe about the world is like a perspective, and it doesn't mean like nobody's right or wrong. It's just like there are different truths, I guess, different perspectives
Yeah,
of the
but
truth.
and so what we've gone through in this whole period of deconstruction is that there are master narratives. Master narratives are very, very powerful narratives. The master narrative that you are a woman and I am a man is a very powerful narrative. You can ask anybody who's non-binary how powerful the narrative is. And so you have to realize that in part you are absorbed by the master narrative, and how much you can free yourself from the master narrative. Like, for instance, how can we free ourselves from the current master narrative that the imagination is the opposite of reality? That's a master narrative that has grown over 800 years and is very powerful. And if we move to that imagination is a form of reality, we move to a master narrative that for 800 years has not been in power. Narrative is power, right? In Russia at the moment, a narrative is being created that is fully in power and shows that Ukraine is not really a country, and therefore it should be annexed. That is a narrative that is in power. We have another narrative that is in power, namely that we believe in democracy. That is another narrative. These are very powerful narratives.
Yeah, kind of a big one is religion too.
Absolutely, that's one of the most powerful ones, yeah.
And what are your thoughts on the Hermetic philosophy?
Well, I am, my passion is alchemy. That's why I wrote these novels about alchemy, which was my reality shifting into 1666 and exploring what it was like then. So that is part of the Hermetic tradition. The Hermetic tradition is actually, I think I like the Hermetic definition of God. The Hermetic definition of God, and if you translate it into current language, is that existence is an endlessly pixelated space in which each pixel is a potential perspective. So it is the notion, the Hermetic notion is that God is the being that has its circumference nowhere and its center everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, to me is very useful, a very useful perspective, because that's how I go into the world of imagination, that you can get in any place of the imagination, you can get into a perspective.
So I was going to ask, with that, tying back to my second, like my question regarding how you guys were talking about like switching into the perspective of the black hole, for example. So for people watching, I know we touched on this last time, but for people watching that are wanting to do that, how could they do that in a step-by-step way? I know they like become it, but I think there might have been some disconnect for people that aren't really in this world yet of understanding this. How can, I guess, we better explain how to become in that perspective of the black hole?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say something that is really important, and that is my trepidation. Right. I teach at a medical school. I teach psychiatrists at a medical school, and so I know that if a person doesn't yet have a place in this world from which they can go to work, from which they can go move out into the world, from which they can do something useful in the world, then I think that it can be dangerous to go to shift perspectives all the time. And so there is a danger to it, because you can actually move out of the world and move entirely into the world of imagination and never come back. So be careful. That's the first thing I want to say. And then I have found that, like you guys, you're doing things together, right? That it's much better to do these things together with somebody else. It doesn't have to be your partner. Frequently, it's very useful for it not to be your partner, but a friend. And have your friend sit with you and ask you, now slow it down, slow it down. Yeah, you're jumping in. Now you slow it down, and then what is your environment like? Focus on your environment. What is it like? Or is it black, or is it green, or what is it? And then you, oh yeah, and is it moving? And then slowly you begin to sense the movement, and the person helps you to keep slow. And then you begin to feel the movement. You begin to get attracted into the movement, and then suddenly the movement takes you in, and you become identified out of your habitual perspective into this other perspective. I always think it's best to do it with somebody else. All the trainings that I'm doing, and I'm training worldwide, all the trainings that I'm doing, I have people work with each other.
So you put them in like a trance state, and then you're kind of like reminding them, and you're there.
Correct. And the state that I'm using is called the hypnagogic state. The hypnagogic state is the state as you fall asleep into sleep onset. So you stay, it's this in between, this liminal space, and that's called hypnagogic. And so I help people to stay in the hypnagogic state, and that comes into being by slowing things down. So as I help you to now, where are you standing? How are you standing? How are you on your feet? And who's standing? First, I would start with the one standing behind, right? You say it's two people. So I first would stay with the one that's behind, because that seems to be an observing consciousness that is necessary for all of this to happen. And you need to keep that connection between you and an observing consciousness. Actually, that is the definition of consciousness itself. The definition of consciousness is knowing with, consciencia, knowing with. So it's always with another perspective. So there's always two perspectives going on. Consciousness is two perspectives. And so, so I would start with the one behind, and then as you sink into the hypnagogic state, then I would get to the one in front. And then when you're deeper into the hypnagogic state, then I would slowly move into the perspective of the alien. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's like, I've never thought of consciousness being two.
Yeah, it's always two. That is the definition of consciousness, two.
Is
It
the other
makes
one for
sense why
subconscious?
the word. Sorry, go ahead.
So subconscious.
Consciencia, knowing with. That is the definition. That
Wow.
is the verbal definition of consciousness, knowing with. So it's awareness of awareness.
Mm. Okay, that's interesting too. And I was just thinking as you were saying that it's very cool that you do trainings like this, and it's very cool that they, go in a partner type of thing. But as you were saying this, I was wondering, do you do like guided hypnosis, kind of like a guided meditation for people at home to try this?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
like so that they would be able to have, if they don't have a person to do it with?
yeah, yeah. No, I do that all the time. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
What I basically do is I guide people into their bodies so that they're fully embodied before they do it, and then they can feel into their body, and through that, in that body, I help them to get into the imaginal space. It's called imaginal, right? There are two words. There's the word imaginary and the word imaginal. And imaginary means unreal, and imaginal means the reality of imagination. So I move them into that imaginal reality, and so that the imaginal reality surrounds them. And then I help them to feel themselves in their body now in this imaginal environment. And then I help them shift out of their perspective into the perspective of something else, so that they can do that. Yes, I do that a lot.
Very cool. I was wondering if you had like a YouTube channel or that on YouTube, for example. That's like what I was thinking. If people were interested, like, could I link them down to that, you like a YouTube video of this, or is this like directly?
I do it in all my trainings, but yeah, my trainings are usually psychologists and psychiatrists. So I could make a YouTube video, but my hesitation is always that people, I don't want to destabilize people too much,
Right.
right? There is a reason for habitual consciousness. The reason for habitual consciousness is that it gives you stability. The reason for that we have some control is that it gives you a sense of stability. The moment that you get into the black hole, you lose your stability. And so I don't want to, on a large scale, start destabilizing people I do not know.
That's
Because
fair.
what I'm doing is destabilizing, but I do it in connection. So I hold you in this process of destabilizing. So you become destabilized, but I'm with you. And so that's, if another person is with you, you can destabilize much more, and you can then begin to sense what is going on beyond. But destabilization, disruption, as we know, is not an easy thing. Disruption can cause a lot of trouble.
Right.
So
100%.
do you have a website? Or
Well, what I teach at jungplatform.com, and so Jung as the psychoanalyst, Jung platform.com, and all my lectures can be found there. I have hundreds of hours of lectures.
oh, awesome. Yeah, that's what I want to watch. I want to watch these happen.
Yeah. So, but if you want to, in our next jam, I could help you go into the black hole and just let people see what happens.
Holy
Because,
crap.
because I think you're stable enough to do that with.
I always do it in my sleep. I've never, well, actually, I feel like that's where I'm always seeing stuff, is in that hypnotic state, like
Yeah, yeah.
between the wakes